The cast for the 50th season of Survivor was announced a few months ago, and as a super fan of this reality show, who has quite literally been watching ever since I could remember, I was extremely disappointed. I think like half the cast is fairly solid, but then there's quite a few head-scratching choices that left me feeling confused. I love Ozzy. His run on Cook Islands is largely what made me a fan of Survivor in my youth, but I also never wanted to see him play again after his Game Changers run. And I kind of felt the same about Suri. She's played so many times, won season 1 of The Traitors, and was just on Big Brother. I have Suri fatigue in all honesty, and since she is essentially incapable of winning an individual immunity challenge, she's probably never going to win the game. I think the sheer number of recent cast members who should have been shoo-ins for the next returnee season who failed to make this cast proves that we need more than one returning player season every 5 years. I, like many of you, would have preferred this to be a second chance style season. I feel like the hardcore fans have been begging for that for years now. So today I'm going to be making my dream Survivor 50 cast, and it will indeed be a second chance style season. Starting with some honorable mentions who didn't make my final list, but that I did consider, and the earliest player that I thought about bringing back was Burden from Pearl Islands. And I don't know, I just kind of liked him on that season and wanted to at least consider some old school players. But he technically already got his second chance on Pearl Island since he was voted out of that season twice. And ultimately I wanted to primarily bring back players who played after the initial second chance season. Now I actually have 3 honorable mentions from David vs. Goliath because that was just an awesome season and cast. And 2 of these players actually made the real life season 50 cast ironically. But I did consider Mike White, Angelina, and Davey. And honestly, Davey came the closest out of these 3 to making my cast, but I had to limit myself to no more than 2 or maybe 3 people per season, because you obviously want to avoid one season of players just ganging up together and running through the entire season. That would surely make for lackluster television. From season 42, I did also consider Omar. I think he was a pretty good strategical player, and I'd like to see him play again at some point. But since we haven't had a second chance season in such a long time, this was a really competitive field of players to choose from, and he just missed the cut slightly for me. I did also consider Carolyn from season 44 because she is absolute chaos and entertainment, but she did just play in season 3 of The Traitors, and I personally enjoy cast members who bring at least some level of strategy and aren't just a glorified character. My last honorable mention, and probably the person who came the closest to making my final cut, was Emily from season 45. And I'm actually happy that she made the real season 50 cast, and I think she has some winner potential. But ultimately I decided to leave her off my dream list, so I could show a little love to some players who played in the seasons directly following the first second chance, and still haven't had the chance to come back yet. Well, now that the honorable mentions are out the way, for my main cast I went with 20 people in total, so 10 men and 10 women. And my ultimate goal was to create a cast where almost everyone involved has a shot of winning. A season where almost everyone brings some strategic prowess to the game, and are capable of winning a challenge without necessarily being a prime Aussie level comp beast. So starting off with the men in chronological order, my first cast member is Jay from Millennials vs. Gen X. And I know Jeff doesn't like casting players who have been on other reality shows, but luckily this is my dream cast and not Jeff's. And I think Jay is just a really fun, likable presence who has deserved a second chance for well over a decade at this point. I think he brings a little bit of everything you'd want from a cast member on a season like this. And I like how cutthroat he's willing to be at times, as can be seen in the iconic Michaela blindside. Next up on my Dreamcast is perhaps the biggest snub from season 50, and that's Dominic from Ghost Island. I mean, come on man, he literally came within a tiebreaker vote from winning the entire game. And he's entertaining in his confessionals. Justice for Dominic, man. He should have been on the season 50 squad, and the fact that he isn't literally floored me if I'm being brutally honest. For my third male cast member, we have our first that actually made the season 50 cut, Christian from David vs. Goliath. And yeah, I mean, who doesn't love Christian? Such a great personality and strategist, and I'm very excited to see him go to work on season 50. I think he may be too big of a threat to win the game, but I'm confident he'll give us some more great moments during his second run. Next up on my cast, I went with another rather obvious choice who also made the real season 50 cut. Rick Devens from Edge of Extinction. Rick was easily the defining personality on his initial season, and I'm sure most of us are really looking forward to his return. I think his game gets a little overrated just due to how messy it was and how many idols and comp wins he needed to get close to the end of the game, but regardless of all that, it was a wildly entertaining ride. Diving into my cast members from the post-Winners at War era, I did end up picking Xander from Survivor 41. And kind of similar to Rick Devens, Xander played a wildly messy game on his first go-around, but out of the dude bro / surfer bro archetype, I do think Xander is one of the more strategic players to fit that role. And given that he did make the final 3 on his first attempt, I think there's a good redemption storyline to be had here, where maybe he could play a more consistent game and actually get some votes at Final Tribal should he find himself there again. Moving on to Season 43, I casted another dude who I thought would be a shoo-in for Season 50, and that's Jesse. Jesse is one of the best players from the modern age of Survivor, and in my opinion is arguably the best player to never win during this period. I love how unforgiving he was willing to play, especially seen in his move to cut Cody when he did. In this current era of all these players wanting to sing Kumbaya and be friendly with everyone, I feel like you need some people who are willing to do anything to win, so Jesse pretty easily made my cast. For my 7th male slot, we have probably the most controversial of my casting choices here, but I decided to cast Caleb from Season 45. And honestly, I just find him to be super likable. Not the best strategist, obviously, but I think he's so personable and such an infectious personality that he could do much better on a second go-around, especially if he's surrounded by less personable gamebot type players. So I think a second chance setting would be perfect for a player like him in all honesty. Next up, we have yet another player who actually made the Season 50 cast. From Survivor 46, I did select Charlie, and my casting of him would have one very important caveat. We have to cool it down with all the Taylor Swift references, my brother. And I'm not even a Taylor Swift hater, but enough is enough. However, as a player, I think Charlie is great, and honestly, I think he should have won his season. He really lost because of Maria's saltiness, so I think he's kind of a prototypical second chance candidate, the player who could have won with just a few minor adjustments to their game. Now, these last 2 picks to round out my field of men are primarily for entertainment's sake, I'm just going to be honest with you, because I absolutely had to cast Q from Season 46. I personally think Q should be cast on every single season of Survivor, literally inject it into my veins. He is such a chaotic player, and I absolutely love the drama he brings. You need at least one player on every season who is an absolute wild card, and for me, Q is that perfect wild card. Liz screaming at him after the reward challenge where he didn't pick her is my favorite moment from like the last decade of Survivor. And for my last male cast member, we have someone who started off kind of like Q, but ultimately became a decent player by the end. And I'm of course referring to Andy from Season 47. And Andy might have had the best character arc I've ever seen on Survivor. He went from literally asking to be voted out to pulling off masterful strategic moves, and honestly coming pretty close to winning the game. And I would absolutely live for an Andy and Q alliance. That might be the most chaotic alliance in the history of Survivor if it were to ever happen. Moving into the 10 women that I casted on my second chance dream cast, I first went all the way back to Survivor Micronesia to cast Natalie. And first off, the fact that we've gotten 2 fans versus favorites style seasons and only 1 second chance is wild to me. And it's also wild to me that Natalie was never brought back. She was a major component of the Black Widow alliance that tore through Micronesia, and I for one would have loved to seen her cast for Survivor Season 50. For my second cast member, we're going to jump forward in time many seasons, but I did also cast Carolyn from Worlds Apart. And she almost made the cut for the initial second chance season, and I'd honestly just love to see her get a second stab at winning it all. I think she's a fairly well-rounded player and was an entertaining personality on her season. With my remaining 8 female cast members, we're now going to be talking about players who all played after the initial second chance season, and for my third slot I would cast Sydney from Koran. And honestly, she was the very last person I casted, so if you want to replace her with Emily from 45, that's fine in my books. but I ended up giving Sydney the nod to spread the wealth a bit more to some of the older seasons, and honestly I think she's a bit of an underrated and well-rounded player, who'd be a dark horse candidate to win it all on a return. For my fourth cast member, I actually went with a player who I think should have won their season, and that's Hannah from Millennials vs. Gen X. Now, when I initially watched her season, I was rooting for Adam and wanted him to win, but I feel like maturing is realizing that Hannah actually played the more dominant game between the two, and I do think she would be a live threat to win a returnee season. The next member of my dream cast is the first person who actually made the season 50 cut, and I would also cast Chrissy from Heroes, Healers, Hustlers. Again, in hindsight, this is another player who I think should have won their season, and even though they weren't super well liked by the fan base, I do think Chrissy brings a good set of intangibles to do very well upon her second go-around. She's a well-rounded player, which again is really the archetype of players I wanted to primarily select. And speaking of well-rounded, I did also cast Gabby from David vs. Goliath. Now, I flip-flopped between Gabby and Angelina for this season for a while, and I do think Angelina brings more chaos and entertainment value, but I personally value players with winning potential, and I don't see a world where Angelina could ever win the game. Whereas I do think Gabby would have a shot to, so she made my cast. This next player I feel like has been forgotten with time, unfortunately, but I would love to see Victoria from Edge of Extinction get a second chance. I think she's a really underrated strategist and would be an absolute dark horse to win if she ever does get a second chance to play the game. She's also the type of player who's comfortable being a villain and betraying fan-favorite cast members, which I think would bring a lot to a second chance style season. Now, my last three female cast members all played in the post-Winners at War era, and the first of these three was Carla from season 43. And honestly, I'm surprised to not see her on the actual season 50 cast. I personally was rooting for her to win season 43 pretty hardcore, and I think she has a really good storyline going into a potential second chance. Her being tricked into playing her idol and then failing to win the Final 5 immunity challenge despite having an advantage sets up a pretty great comeback story in my opinion. And for my second to last casting choice, I went with another person who I think should have been a no-brainer, and that's Maria from season 46. She was a cutthroat comp beast, strategist, and decent character on her season, so I think she brings a lot to the table for a return. The only thing I hold against her is not voting for Charlie at Final Tribal. You will never convince me that she didn't do that out of bitterness because of him making it to Final Tribal over her. However, seeing her play with Charlie again is something that would bring some potential drama. Would they team up, or would they immediately go after each other? Who knows? But anyways, my last and most recent female cast member is Camilla from season 48. And honestly, I think there's a decent argument that she was the best strategist on her season. And she would have won had she not stunk up the joint during her Final 4 fire-making challenge. So I'd like to see her on a season without Kyle, where she could maybe find some sparks of redemption. So as a quick summary, my Survivor Season 50 Dreamcast would be a Second Chance Part 2, and I'd cast Natalie from Micronesia, Carolyn from Worlds Apart, Sydney from Ko-Rang, Hannah from Millennials vs. Gen X, Chrissy from Heroes, Healers, Hustlers, Gabby from David vs. Goliath, Victoria from Edge of Extinction, Carla from Season 43, Maria from Survivor 46, and Camilla from Survivor 48. And then for my 10 male cast members, I'd cast Jay from Millennials vs. Gen X, Dominic from Ghost Island, Christian from David vs. Goliath, Rick Devins from Edge of Extinction, Xander from Survivor 41, Jesse from Survivor 43, Caleb from Survivor 45, Charlie from Survivor 46, Q also from Survivor 46, and Andy from Survivor 47. Well, if you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts on my Dreamcast. I'm sure I'm definitely overlooking a lot of players, so I'd love to hear who you think I got right and who you think I got wrong. Also, please feel free to drop your Dreamcast for a Second Chance Part 2 season in the comments. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace.